as I said, who is a customer is a very important understanding. And customer is a user, a payer, and a buyer. So each one of those roles of a customer, not a customer, but role of a customer becomes the focus in value creation. So on this slide that you see, the users look for performance value, the buyers look for service value, the payers look for price value, and we'll now go into examples of companies who have learned how to create these three different values. Before I get into the detail of each one of them, I want to point out there is not a single company worldwide in my knowledge who has created all three values with equal excellence. Companies tend to focus on one of those three values, performance value, price value, or a service value, but not all three. And from a customer viewpoint, they want all three. And that is why the only company that comes closer to this architecture or thinking is probably Toyota, and I'm not so sure they have done it consciously even, but it is there at least. That's one case where I know that the company is delivering three values consciously or unconsciously. Second point I want to make is that this value creation is a process. In fact, we will have a slide that emphasizes that. It's really a process, whereas most of the marketing is organized into what we call marketing programs. What is the next sales promotion I want to do? What is the next advertising commercial I want to create? What is the next display I want to make in a point of sale? How do I do merchandising? These are what we call programs. And I do believe that programs makes us very tactical, very myopic almost, and maybe one program sort of canceling the other program because we have never understood integration of these programs, or what we now call integrated marketing and integrated marketing communication. In other words, our publicity people, what they talk, our advertising people, what they talk, the merchandising, which is a communication of some sort, our logo, etc. What is the consistency behind? That's a new discipline in marketing called integrated marketing communication. And integrated marketing says it's not just the communication, which is one piece, but is your pricing consistent with your product, which is consistent with your distribution, etc., etc., right? So that's the power of the framework that we have here. Programs don't do a good job. They're tactical and they're short term. The processes actually are longer term, and you see more integration or more synergy that each one of these processes can create for value creation. Last comment, and the point is that companies are doing all these processes, I find fascinating, for some other reasons, but they have never seen what they do as creating value for customers. For example, most companies have a quality process, TQM. In fact, to deal with European Union, you have to have ISO 9000 certification, which is the quality standard for European markets. I mean, there's no way you can do business there without ISO certification. Now, ISO 9000, now there's some new series, ISO certification, ISO, interestingly. So given that, now, while we may do quality processes, let's say Six Sigma for cost reduction, actually it benefits the customer also. So we already do this quite a lot of work, but we never communicate to the customer and use that as a way of at least making them perceive the value we are creating and show them the potential value they have, which they may not understand. So that's the whole point I'm going to go. So let's go into each of the value creation mechanisms. And it's a lot of details, a lot of material here, so bear with me, please. Here is a big chart. This is a very busy chart. I wanted to put all of the things into one chart, and that probably is a disadvantage. We won't go back to this chart, but we'll break it up into components as we go forward. As you can see, among many, many processes, the three that seem to be very relevant to create performance value, which is user role of a customer we are focusing on, is the quality as a process, differentiation as a process, and innovation as a process. And I will go into details of each one of them a little later on. I've similarly identified 3 processes which seem to be the best in terms of creating value for customers for price value, where the role of the customer is a payer. And that turns out to be a target costing as a process, mass customization as a process, and global sourcing as a process. Then I have added 4 value creation processes for creating service value or the buyer value as opposed to a user value or a payer value, as I've been emphasizing again and again and again. And those 4 are, starting at the bottom, number 7, frontline information systems. In other words, more companies, as they deploy CRM, as we call it today, I like to still call frontline information systems by and large, as opposed to back office, which is called the MIS, Management Information Systems. FIS, frontline, is very important to deliver value, service value to the customers. Universal access, presence everywhere as a value creation. Easy to do business with as a value creation. And the last one is, how do you create a relational nurture, which means what do you do after making a sale? And those are the kinds of 4 areas with which companies have learned how to create value. And again, as I mentioned, companies don't even know they are creating value, at least they are not communicating value, even though they have invested in these processes. And no company has invested in all 10 processes at the same time, or all 10 at any time for that matter. So some companies will be stronger in one, other companies will be stronger in the other. Our job here is to learn whichever company does the best job, and can we somehow put this all together. So let's go through this analysis of the performance value. As I mentioned, performance value, the minimum requirement to be in the game of marketing today is quality. You may offer a shoddy product below par quality, but the market is going to be limited to about 10-15% of the total market, and especially only in places where affordability is an issue. I'll give you one of the better examples. In the US now, we are very much obsessed about cosmetic surgery. Probably it's a part of the aging phenomenon, partly it's the lifestyle, whatever the reasons are. Now, cosmetic surgery is often not paid by insurance companies in America. So I am both a user and a payer. Affordability does become an issue. So guess what's happening? More and more American consumers are going abroad, like in Costa Rica, for example, or in Mexico, or more in India, or in Russia, where the cosmetic surgery is 5 times to 10 times cheaper in America. This is called medical tourism, actually, because you are going there as a tourist and you are living in a resort 2 months, 3 months, but this plastic surgeon takes care of whatever you want to do, removing, tummy tuck, as it is called, fattening your, buttocks, for example, enlarging your breast, for women, for example, making eye shapes, right, whatever you do, interestingly. Now, quality may or may not be there. So there is always a market for a low quality product if affordability is an issue. Remember, I talked earlier, consumers don't like to make trade-offs. It's we marketers who make trade-offs and get in trouble in the process. So if we have a market where quality is high, but prices are also high, there always will be a small market with poor quality because of the affordability issue, and those markets may be in the country, outside the country, etc., by and large. But as we put more quality as a minimum requirement, those markets die. In countries like India and China, this is called the unorganized sector. Most of these would be unbranded products. For example, in India, I just did a research study and I found fascinating that 65% of all molded luggage, like Samsonite, 65% of all the luggage sold is totally unbranded. It is assembled in a garage by people by putting parts together, no branding, and sold on the street as vendors. In China, it is usually the clones, the fakes. So you may have the brand name of a top brand, let's say Gucci or Rolex, whatever it is, but what you get actually is a fake product, totally inexpensive, because many people in China or even abroad can't afford a Rolex watch. But as we put more quality as a requirement now, either by government mandate or by management enlightenment, and I think it is the management enlightenment that has made quality as a necessity, and the reason is that poor quality costs you money. There's a lot of literature in quality management that tells you it is in your self-interest as a company to put quality process in place, which is also called now Six Sigma. One of the quality processes is called Six Sigma. The real pioneers are Japanese again in this area. Motorola was the first American company to learn. They actually created a consultancy practice out of this one after learning called Six Sigma process. GE became the major opinion makers because General Electric adopted this process more aggressively across everything they do, not just manufacturing as Motorola thought. And of course, GE became also best in class in Six Sigma process, especially under Jack Welch as the CEO. And of course, my view is that that's great from a company viewpoint, but what is the benefit to the customer? And the logic is very simple. If you go back to the quality literature, it says that if you have a defect in a component or a raw material, and as you do value add, the defect amplifies in the cost to the company, because in the value add product, you have to fix it, the whole product, not just the component. So if the component is only 5% of your total price ex factory or cost, if the raw material is 5%, the defect will cost you to untear down the whole thing. As in automobile recalls, you can see what happens. It's just one part that's defective. In fact, often the part is insignificant, but it is now required by law or required because of the litigation. You get major lawsuits by the consumer class action suits, as we call them, and the penalties are enormous. Well, if that is true up to the factory, guess what? There is even more value add of every product consumer customer does. Do you think I buy my Campbell's soup and eat it as it is? I actually open the can, I cut the lid, I pour things out, I pour water or milk or whatever I do, I warm it up. I'm doing a lot of value add. Household is as much a production unit as it is a consumption unit. Simple idea. In business to business, it's very obvious, because I'm selling my product to a business customer. The customer uses that product in his factory. If that is defective, cost to the customer is even greater as it does value add if something is defective. And of course, in business to business market, they have all these stringent quality inspection. Contracts are written. If you not follow the quality, there's a penalty against you. Not limited just in the factory, as we know, but also in IT services nowadays. I find those contracts are very oppressive on a supplier. If you don't do your job right in software improvement or software upgrade or whatever you do, the penalties are massive. So the supplier has to improve the quality, but there's a value to the customer. Now, what we learn in business to business market, that customer has a value for your quality process. Actually, it is equally true in consumer markets. And that is the Toyota's biggest discovery. That if the car breaks down because you had a defective, poor quality product, consumer pays for it as he is using the car. It's an annoyance, if nothing else. It's a safety problem, if nothing else. And consumers therefore say, I don't want to get in trouble by buying a product that is quality. In fact, this cosmetic surgery I talked about, there are documentaries now on American television that says, are we really going overboard with this obsession for cosmetics and personal appearance improvement to a level where we are compromising for the sake of affordability the quality that's needed? We may be jeopardizing our life in the process. One can understand for terminally ill or diseases like HIV, AIDS, etc. That's we can understand because they're desperations or cancer. But something that's cosmetic, people are saying, is this the right consumer behavior or not? But whatever the rationale out there, we are not here to criticize or comment about what consumer values are. We are saying, are we delivering those values? So quality is even more important to a customer than it is to us. We just need to do the matrix, calculate what is the economic benefit to the customer with our quality, what is the emotional benefit to the customer, what is the convenient benefit to the customer, all the stuff. If we just put that numbers together, we can show to the customer that our quality actually benefits him, not just to us. It's a win-win situation. So that's Six Sigma. And as I mentioned, Japan was the pioneer in this area. And again, as the anecdote goes, guess who taught Japan? Turns out to be one of the American thought leaders by the name of Edward Deming, who was just a statistician, a professor in New York City at NYU, I think. And when Japan was rebuilding its economy, they brought American advisors, and they basically, the industry is the one, not the government, who simply said, made in Japan was a cheap quality image, remember, poor quality, but affordability was an issue, so people bought made in Japan products, and they knew worldwide that market is just not big enough to serve the market like America, Europe, and to actually be export-driven economy. You have to put quality process in place. World was laughing at made in Japan products, and what they did was to improve the quality. By bringing outside experts, they worshipped Deming like a god. He was a statistician, became a management philosopher, management guru. He basically showed, look, statistical process quality control shows you how many defects you are making in your products. And your job as a manager is to minimize those defects. Theoretically, eventually it became a Six Sigma. What is a Six Sigma? 3 standard deviations on the left side of the average, 3 standard deviations on the right side. And if you look at distribution in statistics, if you go into the 3rd standard deviation, the probability or the odds is 1 in billion, which means that you can actually go through Six Sigma, which means the defect is as low as 1 in billion production units, billion units of whatever you do. That was the idea. Very simple but very powerful. And you know what happened? Japanese in the beginning were selling, let's say, in automobiles. So the cheap cars, not terribly as good for the American market because we are used to driving big cars, big highways, no energy problem. I remember paying, would you believe, in America, 29 cents for a gallon of gasoline in Texas, 39 cents everywhere else. So with such cheap energy, we had no worry about energy cost, maintenance cost, etc. So we were having these big American cars. They came out with little commuter cars. You remember Datsun 210, Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, and guess what happened? Those were the cheap cars, like the Yugo thing I talked about. But Yugo made an entry, never moved up in quality. Japanese did it very consciously as a nation. In fact, there was a Japan export control agency, JETRO, which controlled quality assurance in cameras, in watches, in automobiles, everything they did. That you had to have a minimum quality, like Europe has done with ISO standards by and large. And the rest is history. Japan became a quality producing nation. So made in Japan today commands #1 ranking in the world, across the world, and in some countries #2, #3. It surpassed made in Germany, which was very good, made in America, which was very good, and Japan is obsessed with this phenomenon. So companies have learned from the Japanese process, very process driven. In fact, you will find in my analysis, several processes were first pioneered in Japan, and America has very quickly imitated them to equalize the Japanese competitive advantage. And the rest of the world is learning same thing, that what Japan can do, Korea did it, following Japan. If Korea can do it, China should do it, India should do it, etc., etc. Second major way to create value is differentiation. And this is where we talked about not only functional value, but you could also have a psychological value. Because you can differentiate not only the physical product, let's say in design, in quality, raw materials, ingredients. So if you're making a suit, as I'm wearing, well, the fabric, the material would be better. That's a differentiation. The design, the cut would be different, all the stuff we can do. But we learned through advertising, promotion, positioning, as it is called, that we can also differentiate psychologically. And that's the biggest power of marketing. Psychologically, can you differentiate so that product may be the same physically, but people perceive that it is a unique selling proposition. There's a unique value that they have, either because the product differentiated is associated with a socioeconomic group, it is meant for the working people, as beer industry has done, because the biggest consumers in America are factory workers, and they are the heroes. Or can you associate with the personalities like show business personalities or sports personalities? Tiger Woods sells. Michael Jordan sells. Before that, when we had movie stars, way back when Unilever created a Lux soap to compete against Procter & Gamble Ivory, guess what? Unilever founded the whole thing on differentiation, which was all movie stars worldwide. Even today, Lux is associated with movie stars because Lux was positioned as a facial complexion soap, not a body soap. Simple idea like that. And of course, there's a lot of literature in marketing about how to differentiate, including books like, Positioning, the Battle of Mind, Share of Mind kind of a thing. But it's positioning differentiation that becomes very key. And I simply call it in terms of product differentiation, which is a physical differentiation of some sort, and brand differentiation, which is more a psychological, intangible value you are creating for your brand by differentiating psychologically by and large. And let me just add around here, right now you have seen all credit cards are the same because they're all underlying Visa, MasterCard databases and fulfillment, transaction orientation, all the stuff. But certain banks do a better job, certain card companies, in differentiating than others with a clever campaign. Right now, I'm watching a campaign called Capital One, no hassle card, with small, clever campaign that are actually differentiating in otherwise what is a very crowded field. You know how crowded this field is in America? In 2004, I was told American households received pre-approved credit card authorization about 4 billion invitations on about 120 million households. There is not a single day when I don't get, on the average, I'm counting now, I begin to measure myself. This is true as a statistics. There is not a single day, and we have a delivery 6 days a week in America. There is not a single day when I'm not receiving minimum three pre-authorized, pre-approved invitations to subscribe to a card by a card company. They're all alike. There is a quality process in place which says I'm not at a fault, there is no liability. All of them have no annual fee. All of them have the same incentive for me to transfer from my account from the current card to the new card. All of them give me the same free mileage. All the stuff is same. So people are finding, well, if I cannot physically differentiate, can I differentiate emotionally? And you can see clever campaigns coming out of that industry because that's a necessity now. But while we do it for our purposes, consumer benefits. They see a value, and that's a value from a user viewpoint. And of course, you have seen this value coming through affinity programs, right? Affinity programs are saying that if I am an alumnus of a given university, and that university gives a card, I can identify with that credit card, as we have done with vanity license plates on automobiles, as we do in fact with clothing, where I put my university where I graduated as a name and a logo. They're all differentiation. So this is the second major process. A third process is innovation, really creating new products. And of course, there are several types of innovations. And again, we have a lot of academic research and in marketing, especially about innovation. While we have studied quite a lot diffusion of innovation, how do consumers adopt the innovation? This is the other side. This is the supply side of innovation. So you can have small, marginal, incremental innovations, changing the product packaging, for example, changing the size, etc. You can have a major innovation which would be design change, like in automobiles, in appliances. Or you actually can have an innovation even further into a radical innovation. So 3 categories of innovation again, I don't want to get into the details about how companies do innovation. My view is that how they create value here. That's what my focus is. And innovation, you can create value by simply putting it in a way that nobody thought about putting it together, which is the Apple example about the iPod. There is not a single new technology there. It's all the same existing technology, but they somehow put it together and made it into one of the most successful products. Remember, this used to be the core competence of a company called Sony. Isn't that interesting? Sony was famous for doing these things. If you go back to the history of Sony, the original founders went into affordability. They found that the radio was created, but it was electrical plugs, big size console like the television is today, very expensive, more like a durable good. I will buy it once in my lifetime, maybe twice. I will do repair maintenance by putting vacuum tubes, however the radio worked in those days. Fascinating, right? Price was so high, so the co-founders, remember Japan always wanted to go after markets that can afford technologies, and came out with what they call cheap radio, transistor radio. They didn't have to invent the technology because transistors were invented by whom? They were invented by Bell Laboratories for military purposes. But they were allowed to license it, declassified now, and Sony got the license to take the transistors and then make it into portable radios. So it gave two benefits, portability as a benefit. Second benefit was no need for electricity, plugs. And a third benefit was that it's very affordable. So even the poor people in India, China can have a radio. Radio reach goes out, which is great for the radio stations, either a government radio station because it wants to reach the masses. It was also good for the private commercial radio networks like in America because then they have more audiences out there. That was the whole idea pretty much, right? So it was very simple idea. And that's how they began to come out about, in fact, pretty much innovation. They duplicated the same thing, as you know, with Walkman. What's a Walkman? It's basically personalized radio. But then they forgot to do innovation, or they couldn't deliver it. Our view is that Sony diversified into content business by buying out Columbia Pictures, Sony Music record company. They're not focused on the traditional business, so they lost eye of the ball that was their core competency. Sony began to then get into, of course, the PlayStation 2, went into the personal computers, etc. So in the traditional music business, guess what? Apple, which is a computer company, suddenly figures out there's a market opportunity, puts it all together. And of course, Apple is a much smaller company than Sony, does not have the silos or the product divisions, and you can now have a cross-breeding or cross-fertilization of different core competencies. And that's what Apple did. So Apple iPod ran with success. In fact, all successful major breakthroughs you will see, the idea was very simple. And they put it together. So companies do these things. Now, what is the value to the person? That's the whole point. You are creating value in the marketplace, which is why they are buying it. Users are finding it some value. We need to figure out, can we articulate then, which is the marketing job. And by the way, I find, contrary to all of our expectations, Walmart in retailing is more of an innovator than people have realized. It has pioneered so many new things in the way it operates the business. So I deliberately used Walmart as an example because innovation does not mean a product innovation. Innovation may mean a process innovation. It's the way you do business. A Walmart logistical system is a pioneer in its industry. Walmart data mining, what they do through scanner data, is a pioneering system they've put together. Walmart warehousing, hub and spoke, is a pioneering system. They're largest in everything. Walmart, the way they do business in China is very fascinating again, and they're growing enormously. So all of these are sort of pioneering things Walmart has done as a way of creating innovation. Each one of them has a customer value in the role of a customer as a user. So these are the three. I'm sure there are more processes out there, but in my research, I found these three were the most dominant one. And would you believe, just in this one area, performance value, a company that is good in quality is not necessarily good in innovation. A company that's good in differentiation is not necessarily good in quality. So what we have to do is to show you that you need all three, and there's a pecking order. Quality is the minimum first necessary condition. Once an industry gets equalized on quality, then differentiation takes over. It looks like that's my analysis, that's my belief system. Once differentiation has run out of its potential by and large for creating value for the customer, then innovation becomes very much a necessity and necessary. It's not just a nice thing to do, that's your survival game. So there's an order built into the three processes in my presentation here, okay? I will now move on to the next value creation, and that has to do with price value. This is the payer role of the customer, as we talked about earlier. And what I find around here is that there are again three processes that seem to dominate worldwide. The process that is probably the longest in place, and again began in Japan first, like quality, is called target costing. Very simple idea, but probably one of the most powerful ideas. The idea is that in a non-inflationary economy, and as you know, Japan was the first one to have a deflationary economy, which means their home market taught them a lot of lessons. Rest of the world was highly inflationary. America also had high inflation in the 70s called stagflation, and this can be measured by cost of capital by definition. When the interest rates rise, you know inflation is high. Japan had interest rate, Bank of Japan will loan money to central banks under 1%. And those banks will loan money, in fact, to customers, industrial customers, very cheap. Financing was not a problem because they were desperate to create economic growth. So in a non-inflationary environment, the logic was that the traditional cost accounting and pricing is a bad model. In industrial age, we learned that best way to maximize profits is that your marginal price, the price of the next unit you want to sell in the marketplace, must equal your marginal cost. You optimize your profits, which is great. So our interest was always on understanding costing, cost accounting, and what is the marginal cost and how low can we price so that the average price and a marginal price put together comes out to be most profitable, right? Well, Japanese figured out that that's the old model. That model was anchored to our cost-based pricing, or what in defense industry we call it cost plus pricing. Defense contracts are always cost plus. Here are my costs, here is my margin, open margin, and you have to pay me, and there you have the cost overruns to either done to make more money, or I don't know why, or in fact to just you can't control because you are betting on the future a technology and you don't know where it will end up in terms of cost structure. Construction people do the same thing, cost plus, here is my transparent open margin. Japanese said that model is wrong. What we need in the world today is what's called price minus. We says in a non-inflationary competitive markets, is the markets who will decide the price, not the manufacturers. And therefore, we know the prices will be over next 3 years, 5 years, whatever cycle is, usually it's a 3-year cycle, that in a non-inflationary, highly competitive industries, prices will erode further and further, let's say on the average 5% a year. Now that's just a norm, it depends on the industry. So they said that 3 years out, we will have a price pressure of about 15%, let's say. And you can do a cumulative average, by and large if you wanted to. Let's say 15%. And the question is, what can we do now as managers on a proactive basis to still make money in a declining price environment? That's called target costing in a simplest way. It's much more detailed than that, but I'm just going to give you what I consider to be a crystallized summary view, sort of a cliff notes of, as it is called, what is target costing. The process is very complicated. It now says that what you begin to do is to break down not the product, but the cost of the product. and find out what your cost distributions are, just like you do with, remember, customer distribution revenue. I said it's the same 20-80 ratio, same Pareto's law, that among all your costs, let's say 100 different cost points, maybe the top 20 cost points control 80% of your cost. Focus on those and somehow manage them in anticipation of price reduction. It's called target costing. And the company that has done very well, that practice that began in the Japanese, again in the automobile sector primarily, then into appliances, is now taken over in America by two companies in two different areas. First one is Intel, but almost accidentally, not in a direct correlation, but it's same conclusion, especially, and that is Intel. And in the case of Intel, they discovered Moore's law, that every 18 months in the chip building business, integrated circuit that you make, you have to double the performance. Historically, that's what happens, that the cycle of innovation is so fast that you have to double the performance at the same cost. So you are creating more value for the customer at half the cost, essentially. That's target costing in some fashion. That's what they did. So you had the 286 chip, then it's in 18 months, you make it obsolete deliberately to 386, you make it obsolete to 486, for example, and then you start the Pentium series. So price performance ratio constantly goes up, which means the payer now gets a price value for the same capabilities. It is much more affordable. So today, computers are enormously affordable. Microsoft did the same thing with Windows. As they grew the volume, and both of these industries are fixed cost industries, as you know. In other words, my first chip, if I make, I have to build a wafer factory, as they call it, and the total cost of design and factory is about $2 billion now. So my first chip will be what? $2 billion. What's the cost of my second chip? Absolutely dropping, because, in fact, I have no cost. It's just minor chemicals to process the second chip. If you think that's a very low cost, let's say 1% of the original cost, or even 1/10 of 1%, in software it's even more aggressive, because Windows NT, one of the operating system platforms, my first cost may be $250 million to come out with an operating new system. Cost of my first copy is $250 million. What's the cost of my second copy? Nothing. And by the way, this is the digital revolution. All analog technologies are very expensive. All digital technologies are crashing the prices. Have you seen the price of cameras crashing? Price of LDC screens crashing? And these are all pioneers originally in Japan. Then Intel picks it up, Microsoft picks it up with a different approach, but the same conclusion. But the company that I found fascinating using this practice is, in this case, again, would you believe, Procter & Gamble, whose case history we talked about how they learned to be customer-centric, customer being a retailer, trader, etc. They discovered the same thing out of their Japanese experience, that target costing is absolutely critical, because when your customer now is a very large retailer like Walmart, and Walmart has a philosophy of everyday low price, which means they are actually offering the best products at affordable products. Walmart is another company like Toyota, which seems to manage all three things. It offers better product, better brand names at affordable prices, lower than market, not lowest, not sale, but lower than, especially in rural markets. As you know, Walmart began in rural America, where these brands were not available, and if they were available, they were very expensive. And of course, they do it in a customer-friendly manner. There's a greeter at the store and all the stuff. You can read the story about Sam Walton's philosophy and all the stuff we can talk about, right? But the point I'm making is that if Walmart is your customer, whose philosophy is to deliver always lower prices in the marketplace, they're going to demand price reduction. No matter how valuable your brand. Remember, we have this wrong notion that just because I'm a branded product, I can command higher price. I don't buy that at all. Even the branded products, there is a price erosion. My view is that the only way you can sustain branding differentiation is to control the capacity. If there is an excess capacity, there always will be price reduction for branded products as well as commodity products. Makes no difference. And that's what happened. So P&G figured out to keep Walmart as a loyal customer, they will have to, remember I talked about traders have no loyalty attached to the emotion of experience and consumption. They're just buyers and sellers. So economics will drive their thinking anyhow. They're business people. And therefore, P&G, Procter & Gamble put together a target costing practice. So you now have the customer profitability analysis. They figured out their cost aligned around customers. By the way, I'm told that is now even a more secret formula, that activity-based costing, than Coca-Cola secret formula in making the Coca-Cola syrup, for example. Target costing. How can we create a new way of doing manufacturing and supply chain in general, so that 3 years from now, when there's a 15% price reduction, I can make more money. My margins will increase with price reduction, not by price increase, obviously, but by cost reduction. That's called target costing in a simple way. A second platform that has come in, and this again we believe began in Japan, but although there is no real like quality, I know exactly where it came from, Six Sigma, all the stuff, we don't know origin, but most of the books in mass customization as a process are written by American scholars and practitioners. And the idea again is very simple, that in the industrial age we had the notion of economies of scale. In manufacturing there is a setup cost. The setup cost is high, and therefore if you only make one unit and you have to reset again, cost will be high. There are no economies of scale. If the setup cost is high, you make more units at the same time. For example, this presentation I'm videotaping, the people who are my producers and directors tell me that, look, I can do it 2 hours if you want it, or 6 hours. Setup cost is big. So please figure out how many hours you want to do it, and I will set it up accordingly, right? Well, that's the old economic model. In automobile, that's how they built the factories. In appliances, that's how they built the factories. The new model says that, can I actually create the economies of a mass scale production, but I can make different items and different variety at the same time to satisfy a market. Why this is important? Because the customer needs are getting more diverse with changing demographics. Demographic diversity is enormous worldwide. Age diversity, income diversity, lifestyle diversity, ethnic diversity, all that stuff, and affordability. But affordability is not widening as much. So how do you manage to offer somebody a product which is uniquely designed for them, but without charging custom prices? That's called mass customization. It's a process. It's a flexible manufacturing as a word. And some companies have learned how to do it better than others. I will use 2 examples that I know about as to how these companies shifted their manufacturing or distribution, because this concept can be applied like Six Sigma everywhere. One, of course, is a Motorola company. Again, like Six Sigma, they were sort of the first users of this process. There is a pager factory in Florida, I'm told, which can make as many as 20 million combinations of pagers with zero inventory. It's a flexible manufacturing. No product is ever built before demand comes in. By the way, Dell Computer does something similar. Cisco is trying to do the same thing. And therefore, you are basically demand-driven manufacturing, as it is called. You make your manufacturing processes flexible. Benetton used to do that thing. They will have actually retail stores telling what color of sweaters they need, and then they will make it accordingly, so your whole inventory control, inventory management is more efficient. And I have an example better than that a little later on. So here is Motorola, who puts this flexible manufacturing process, and guess what? Their Six Sigma goes up from 5.3 to 5.9, which means defect in building a pager goes down. Their cycle time rapids up. It's also called lean manufacturing, L-E-A-N, or lean operations sometimes. That actually lean operation is a bigger concept. This is one process inside. I want to talk about mass customization primarily because it's very easy to understand also. And so around here, for example, their cycle time has increased. It used to take 4 hours to make a pager. Today it takes only 4 minutes to build a pager. And they have a third process called TCS, Total Customer Satisfaction. I don't know the numbers, but they claim customers are more happy. Who are their customers? Their customers are paging retailers or paging service companies, and they want different variety by different markets, by geography. So actually they can do the assortment, which was the job of a retailer, right at the factory. And how do you do this thing? I always have compared this to a French restaurant versus a Chinese restaurant. Think about a French restaurant. How big is the variety in the menu? Highly limited, because chef is very proud about each recipe. It took him many years in a culinary school and experience to create that recipe. He's very fussy about each ingredient, right? Very limited number of entrees, maybe 5, 6. How are the prices? Very expensive. How often people eat at a French restaurant? Only occasionally, like an anniversary, birthday, graduation. How many people can you bring? Only limited people, because it's very, very expensive. How long does it take? It takes forever to get your meal at a French restaurant, right? And what is the attitude? Remember, we talked about TCS, customer satisfaction. What's the attitude? I am the chef. You will eat what I tell you is good for you. No variations. If you say, can you make this slightly different? You are violating my religion here, my tradition. I'm the chef. It's the pride of an artist. Are you with me? Well, in a highly diverse market, it does not work. If the market was homogeneous, everybody ate only French food, only in French restaurant, they're always wanting the same thing. In a homogeneous market, you can still be okay. So contrast that with a Chinese restaurant, or now a Thai restaurant, from Thailand. It's the same thing. In a small restaurant, how big is the menu? You see, 120 items easily listed, right? Do you think he has 120 separate recipes? He probably never went to a culinary school, right? Even. What he has is 6 ingredients, 7 ingredients, 4 or 5 condiments. He mixes and matches. That's mass customization, and he delivers any way you want it. So you say, I want a little spicy food. Is it okay? Sure. You never get a no answer from these guys. Have you noticed that? Any variety you want, because they have figured out how to do mass customization in their kitchen operations. It's just mix and match. It's like what we do with us, buffets nowadays, right? Breakfast buffets the same way. Hotels have learned, restaurants, breakfast restaurants have learned, hotels especially have learned that buffet is a simpler idea. Let customer make a choice of his own. He puts his own stuff, that's it. Otherwise it's a long waiting time, the whole thing, same 3 things, cycle time, quality assurance and TCS, total cost, all 3 processes come together, right, in mass customization. And how are the prices? Pretty reasonable, so I want to go more often, right? Repeat business. I want to bring more people, obviously. And of course, how fast can you get the meal? In fact, I just placed an order, I'm talking with my friend, and all of a sudden the meal comes. How did you know? Did he anticipate, right? Kind of a thing we think about. And they make money. I remember in the 80s, I went to one of the new Hawaii islands that was opened up, Molokai. It used to be a lepers colony. And at that time, obviously, people were not allowed to settle there. I went there. Native population is only 5,000 to 6,000. It's a tourist place, essentially. There are no more plantations by Del Monte, for pineapple and all the stuff. It's becoming more tourism from agriculture, becoming eventually probably more, in fact, some sort of an industrial activity. And I was absolutely surprised. Even McDonald's can't make money. Burger King can't make money, and there were 2 Chinese restaurants. I talked with the guys. They said, this is the way we make money. Of course, their cost structure is also hidden because they don't charge the family time as their labor cost, obviously. Ingredients are very low cost. So affordability, price value is all about affordability. And what they do is make the food affordable without compromising on the quality. That's the whole point. And that's what they do. That's called mass customization. Motorola did it in the factory. Another company that I identified with, I had their senior executives come and teach in my class. I learned about them. I got obsessed about what they do. They're absolutely best in class, or used to be best in class. It's called Lex Pantyhose. The finest distribution system I've ever seen. 120 1,000 profit centers. Each rack, this as you know is women's pantyhose. They shifted the whole distribution, which was their innovation, process innovation. In the old days when women were primarily homemakers, they wore pantyhose only on social occasions when they went out for a dinner, in a party, something like that. As women began to work outside the family, working women phenomenon grew in America since the late 60s. Pantyhose became a daily necessity. Pantyhose sold only through the department stores, behind a counter. It used to come in cellophane wrapped things. Product packaging was so lousy in the whole supply chain. It was one of those hard products to manage physically. So what they did was, very interestingly, and pantyhose in a cellophane wrap behind a cardboard looked ugly. It was not inviting. It was emotionally not bonding. So they did a fantastic research, and they figured out as more and more women are working, they want convenience of daily shopping, which comes surprisingly, in fact, primarily from grocery stores, not from department stores. They don't go to department stores every day. They go to grocery store every day. That's what they did. So they shifted the distribution system, put the pantyhose in an egg. Egg was put in a decorative rack. Colorful eggs are out there. People get excited emotionally. It's an inviting place to buy the product. Product has an emotional value now. Distribution matches properly. Price was affordable at the same time. And what they did now, the mass customization aspect for legs is not on the price side as much as on the variety that they customize. So if you go to the city of New York, Manhattan Island, you have such cultural diversity. You have the African American Harlem, the black people Harlem as it is called, the Spanish Harlem, the Puerto Ricans who have settled, Hispanic people, and you have the typical WASP population, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant affluent people, all within maybe 4 or 5 miles. Each mile is a territory, and each mile on the rack, while they make 120 separate SKUs, stock keeping units, in the factory, guess what? They only have on any one rack 6 or 7 matching exactly to the right audience. So the variety that you get in the African American Harlem is different from the Hispanic Harlem, which is different from the WASP population, Upper East Side as it is called in Manhattan. Okay? Because women's bodies are different, texture, color is different, skin color is different, etc., etc. They learned how to do mass customization. And this is true throughout the country. It's a massive, massive operation. Now, how do they manage all this stuff? Again, in all these cases, like Motorola, if you build a product and you offer, it's very expensive, you create variety nobody wants to buy. So again, what they've done is to start with demand-driven manufacturing. Key idea again, as opposed to manufacturing driving demand, which is what we do in selling. If you can't sell the product, get rid of it through, sale at the end of Christmas. Christmas cards are sold next day, 50% off, something like that, That actually is no value creation. These guys know how to create value. So 120,000 racks, guess what? I was told, this is in the 80s, so I don't know what it is today. I was told that, all of the truck drivers are women, which was just news to me. I never thought women were truck drivers. And I said, how do you motivate them to drive trucks? These are light trucks, obviously. They have an enormous power over the retailer, especially in the grocery store, because the grocer is not interested in pantyhose. He is what we call the meet and produce guy. Okay? So now you have an enormous power to put the rack where you want it. So you do merchandising. Tremendous power. You are the woman, you are the user, you know exactly how it will sell, what the consumers are looking for, because buyers are mostly women, hopefully all women, right? Interestingly. That's what exactly what they do. And they do twice a week sweep of the whole nation. What that means? That means that they take the rack out. The eggs, as they are called, are missing. That means customer took it, went to the counter, and if the scanner technology was everywhere, they don't need this way of counting, because scanner will give you information through the checkout counters. But quite a lot of the racks are in let's say in a hotel, news and gift shop, into public places where obviously there are no scanner technologies as yet, as you have in supermarkets or as mass merchandisers like Walmart, etc. So they still have this manual system to some extent. Twice a week they make a sweep, and all of that is brought to the regional distribution centers from where they know and tell the factory, which turns out to be Hanes, Hanes, which used to be their manufacturing arm. So this is strictly a distribution company, Lex Pantyhose. Manufacturing is done, and manufacturing basically does manufacturing after they're told. Now, why does this model work? It works with a very simple idea in marketing, which says if it is a convenient product, not a shopping good, consumers will buy the same thing again and again. Remember my earlier concept I talked about? Consumers like to reduce choices in a repeated, non-critical products. Too much shopping is too costly. It's not worth it. You will get the same answer anyhow. So this has become a convenience product like milk or a bread or something like that, and you begin to buy accordingly. And therefore they know that all we need is to replace the particular SKUs that are sold. Perfect model. And they get their cost very low in the process. It's called mass customization. It says I can personalize to individual markets, individual customers, even as the banking does, personal banking, for example, as the airlines do with all of the databases through CRS, as they call it. We'll talk about that later on. That's what they do. So Lex Pantyhose is a beautiful, beautiful story about how you can do mass customization in distribution. Now retailers like Target are learning how to do mass customization by store. Companies like Home Depot, Walmart, retailer are saying our stores are not the same. We are putting stores in highly affluent neighborhoods. We are putting stores in working class neighborhoods. We are putting stores where in fact women are working. We are putting stores where women are not working. Just goes on. How do you manage? You need to put a merchandise on the floor which is mass customized, the same concept, downstreaming further into the retail environment. What began in the factory and before factory, what might have begun in the raw material and the component level by and large. The last practice, and the one that is just beginning to happen in a big, big way, is global sourcing. In other words, buying not from just country by country. So if I'm doing business in this country, I buy from suppliers in that country. Or if I'm doing business in this country, I buy from other countries, kind of a notion. This is a very strategic initiative called global sourcing. It simply says that, look, I am a retailer, let's say Walmart in this case, and I would like to serve customers all over the world, but who said that Chinese customers will buy Chinese products, or Chinese customers will buy American products, or Chinese customers will buy Indian products. I don't care. My job is to serve the market, shape the market by sourcing all over the world. So Walmart at one time prided that they will only sell made in America products. Remember, that used to be the slogan in the early days. It's gone. It is one of the largest global sourcing, which is their core competency as a process. Source the products anywhere in the world which will meet their quality assurance and the price and the logistical systems that those companies can offer by and large. So they buy products from all over the world. In fact, this is another area why I get upset about branding. We have put emphasis. The largest single brand sold in the world in luggage is probably an unlabeled brand made by some Chinese manufacturer and never put a cent of advertising, whereas we think Samsonite is the largest luggage because it's the power of the retailer here. People buy whatever is at Walmart. They trust Walmart. They think values are there, prices are good. Walmart has figured out how to create value, price value for the customers. It is their perception at least, right? And that's what happens. So Walmart is now shopping enormously, sourcing from China some products. They are now looking seriously at India. I'm told that from a $3 billion sourcing done today, they're going to ramp up to about $30 billion very quickly, because India is becoming now a major supplier of products. Let's say if you go to the automotive section, automobile parts, all the after services called TBA, tire, batteries, accessory market. Products are made in India more, not just in China or in Eastern European countries or in Brazil or wherever they are. That's called global sourcing. This is a new practice emerging. Related to global sourcing is a second element which is called outsourcing, and that's called the BPO, business process outsourcing. And that's the other area where countries like Ireland, which captured the call centers, Philippines, which captured the call centers, India then began. India is the dominant call center operator in the world. Almost 40% of all outsourced call centers are working or are housed in India, because it's just like a clustering. The country has created the core competency of human capital, databases, infrastructure to dominate the market, just as they dominate in diamond business. India is the largest diamond cutter in the world. For the same reason, they have the expertise, they have the supply function to cut the diamonds and all the stuff by and large. But is it sustainable? We don't know. Down the road, we think countries like Canada actually may become as much, in fact, competitive in the call center business as India, for example. But that's the global sourcing. Idea is that I am not going to be loyal to a country, and even a country made in country image, or even a brand name. I'm going to be loyal only to my customers in creating a price value, affordability value. And what I will do around here is to put my quality standards, in this case as a retailer, same thing as a manufacturer, and I will make sure that I find suppliers who will make those products for me, meeting my quality standards and the price points that I want. Interesting change. And therefore, quality assurance comes now from a retailer, not from a manufacturer. In fact, the pioneer of this concept of quality assurance 100 years ago was a retailer in England called Marks and Spencer. Remember Marks and Spencer? All of their brands were private label because no manufacturer ever had any. Remember, branding and manufacturing was just coming in. They are ahead of the curve. So they decided they will identify the right makers, nurture them well, buy their products, source properly, and since British Empire was worldwide, they bought different products made in different countries. They were the first people in global sourcing. Same idea then was cloned in America by two companies, in the grocery business by a supermarket called A&P, you might remember, Atlantic and Pacific, coast to coast, first supermarket that went across the country. And all the brand names there were actually private label. I have personal experiences because I like to drink tea. And I just didn't like the traditional brands I was getting, so I would go to A&P, and they had a private label brand because they sourced it from someplace, Kenya, Ceylon, or Sri Lanka, I don't care. And that tea, which is a loose tea, was absolutely the right thing for me. I loved that tea, and I would go. So I was loyal to that brand made by A&P and not necessarily to Lipton or Brook Bond or now Tata Tea from India, whatever they are. So they know how to create price value. Very affordable, in fact, more affordable than the other brands who are advertising enormously, and had a loyal, fanatic loyalty. That's what A&P did in grocery products before brands became significant from manufacturers. And the same thing was done by Sears. Sears created world-class brands by quality standards. Sears Tough Skins brand of jeans was better designed, better materials than Levi's. Sears Craftsman lawnmower is better designed and better made than Toro, which is the quality standard. Sears tools, Craftsman tools, are better designed and better made from a construction worker viewpoint, user viewpoint, than, for example, Black & Decker. Sears brand of Die-Hard battery is a better designed battery than Exide. I can go on and on and on. Sears was the quality assurance, you see. Remember, at that time, retailers were the quality assurance, not manufacturers, because manufacturing were just transitioning from agriculture age to the industrial age. That was the whole thing. So global sourcing, the practice really is in retailing first and then the manufacturers are learning from that practice. So this is 3 processes on the price side. Let me go to the last area, which has to do with the service value. Sometimes I also call this as personalization value, okay, to make it 3 P's, right? Performance value, price value, personalization value. But I want to go back to the traditional language, which is what I have used in my earlier writings, and talking about this one is service value, because that's what the industry uses as a language. And I've found 4 processes companies have used to create service value. The first one really is frontline information systems. And the first place where this was really done under the legacy systems, or what's called client-server architecture, was in the airline industry. Pre-deregulation or open skies in America, large carriers like American Airlines created a Sabre system, S-A-B-R-E. United Airlines created Apollo system. Delta, third largest, had a world span in a partnership with other carriers. And that these dedicated systems began to downstream databases to the travel agents in those days. So travel agents would have a dedicated desktop. It's very similar to Bloomberg Financial Services. You get their terminal, and therefore on the terminal or on your, now they offer it on your PC, but in those days PCs were expensive. So they built dedicated workstations, as they're called, client server, right? Server is in the back, a storage thing, and a client is the place where the person doing the work using, the typical CRT and all the stuff, no intelligence, the intelligence back is the server essentially. That's what they did. And Sabre system was therefore having, and of course they offered that as a service to travel agents whose job was made much easier. In fact, they could print the tickets if they wanted to. They could do the frequent flyer miles properly. They can have special meal requests. All of this was done from an airline viewpoint to get the cost out, because they had to otherwise do all this work in their back office there. This is all done by travel agent, making it very easy for travel agent to do, who was their customer at that time, who can interface with the passenger, with the customer essentially, and user customer. And of course, as you know, largest market in airline is not as much personal travel market, but it is business travel market. Corporations are your customers. Today, you know that this is so downstream, frontline information systems. Now it goes from there to my PC. More and more airlines are now web-based. They simply say, come to the PC, through PC somehow, wireless or wireline, get into my database, and you can do your own seat assignment. You can make your request. You can buy your ticket, e-ticket as it is called. And have you seen at the airports now we have these electronic kiosks, and the manpower behind the counter is reduced enormously. That's a frontline information system. In fact, I'm told people, and I feel the same way as a traveler, as a frequent traveler, actually, I like to deal with that kiosk more so than the person. It's very user-friendly. Very similar to banking did it. It's another frontline information system called ATM machines, right? And now online banking. This whole frontline information system is beginning to take an enormous service value, primarily because it is becoming internet-based, which means it is capable of all 3 things which no IT technology ever did before. It is a tool for information gathering. I'm told today that as much as 70% of all car buyers actually go to the web first and do the search, let's call it a Google, Google search, and before they go to the dealer. Isn't that interesting? So it can provide you information. I don't have to go to the dealer. It's so hassle. Remember, consumers have no time. But I can also do an email exchange. If I have a question, I raise that question, there's somebody who says, here is your answer. And I can do the transaction at the same time. So I can do interaction, I can do exchange, which is transaction, and I can do information, the 3 platforms of marketing. Internet is the only one that delivers all 3. Television delivers only 1, maybe 2. Telemarketing does some, but not others, etc., etc. So this is a very powerful tool, and more frontline information systems will become the norm, and therefore the service value go up. What is the service value? It is availability, any place, anytime I want, and in a convenient manner. The second dimension is convenience, as we talked about earlier. Second thing to do is universal access, which is the point I was making. Online ordering has become very much a possibility. But I want to talk about the second part. I mean, we all know about online shopping and online marketing, eBay type phenomenon, all the stuff we know. So I would not go into the details. My view is universal access. By the way, one of the best examples of universal access on which the company actually made money turns out to be Coca-Cola. While they talk about branding and secret recipe and all the stuff, the real core competency of Coca-Cola, if you analyze it, is distribution. In the remotest jungles of the Amazon, if nothing else, the native will give you a bottle of Coca-Cola. First time when they enter India, which was in 60s, for example, late 60s, I was doing research on population control. In those days, you have to control the population was the theory by the governments, as opposed to humans are an asset. They thought humans are a liability to the society, kind of a theory. And that's very interesting. At that time, the idea was that how do we control the population? Of course, you can educate the people, but how we distribute contraceptives. And one of the ideas implemented in India was that we can take these large multinationals. There was a tea company called Brook Bond, which is owned by Lipton, which is owned by Unilever now, which had the massive distribution system in the remotest villages of the country. People sold as agents. Even in the 60s, they had like 450,000 agents, each one selling a pound of loose tea in a box. On a bicycle, they will go walking. They're sort of middlemen. They're the retailers, right? Agents, as they call them. Coca-Cola was another one. So Coca-Cola core competency is not just branding and secret recipe, the product and branding, but it is also the user side, but it is also the distribution side. Access, universal access. That universal access now is getting more and more affordable and equalizer with the internet. I can today, a small company can provide universal access, as we have found through eBay, or a large company can provide equal access. So this is less of a competitive differentiation, it becoming a necessity. You have to offer universal access to be just in the business, just like you have to have quality just to be in the business, just like you have to have prices which are competitive just to be in business, kind of a thing. So that's universal access. I do want to talk about what I call there in the slide the pizza industry analog. The debate is going on that online shopping or online retailers versus regular retailers, who is going to survive in the long run? My view is that you have to do business both ways. Customer does not like to be steered in one direction or the other by marketers. They want freedom of choice in terms of location and time. So I call it the pizza industry model, or what we call brick and click model. In pizza industry, what happens? You have all three choices. If I want to dine in, I can go to the pizza restaurant like a Pizza Hut. If I want to have it delivered, which is the other extreme, I order it and Domino's Pizza will deliver at my home precisely on time or within a window of time. If I want to pick it up because I'm going to be on that way for whatever reason, I want to pick it up, I don't care, maybe because I'm going to eat the thing on my way someplace, well, I can stop and pick it up, right? I just do ordering. Any three ways. Any way the customer wants, needs, kind of option. That's basically universal access. So universal access means I create no bottlenecks for the customer from a time and a location. So it's called anytime, anywhere access by and large. The third process is called easy to do business with, which means that the transaction that I do, whether it's information, in interaction we talked about, and exchange, the three things in marketing I do between a customer and a supplier. From a customer viewpoint, it says the way the company does business, it's easy to do business. At the end of the experience, I like them rather than getting upset, anger, frustrated. And some companies are good at this and others are not good at. The best in class here are companies like what used to be Nordstrom. Tom Peters, in his book In Search of Excellence, enormously praised Nordstrom as one of those, in fact, service-oriented companies where it was very easy to do business. The legendary stories were that a lady comes angrily bringing, I guess, a pair of tires, I guess, and simply said, my husband doesn't like these tires, you must take it back. And the clerk says, do you have a receipt? He says, I have no receipt. The clerk says, all right, I'll take the tires back. How much did you pay? Think about that one. Didn't even ask for, verification and all the stuff. She said, I paid this much amount. Fine, no problem. It turns out Nordstrom does not sell tires. Now, this can be abused by the customers, sure. We understand that. In fact, I'm writing a separate book called Dumb Marketing, where customers outsmart business marketers. So there is an abuse, but what percent it is? Can we somehow monitor? What they do is very smart. The frontline people, the sales clerks, are at a level of education as well as training that they know whether that customer is genuine or not, and does the customer do business with Nordstrom or not. I've seen the same kind of a thing at a Disneyland, Disney World, any Disney location. You see the friendliness with the frontline people there. The way they manage crowds probably is one of the best things that governments can learn, how to manage large crowds. And how can you make them stand in line so long and still be happy? Have you seen all the things they do in a typical Disney World or a Disneyland, and we think that they are basically easy to do business with by and large. And nowadays, more and more companies with the internet, I can have tickets printed ahead of time for an entertainment event. I don't have to stand in line, make it easier and easier. So easy to do business with in terms of information gathering, in terms of interaction, in terms of transaction, and post-sale experiences. Which means if I want to return the product, if I have a complaint, how do I handle that thing, all that thing. And by the way, that post-sale is where I find American Express is, again, one of the better companies. If you have any problem in your bill that has come in, or if you have a problem because you lost your credit card, something, the recovery, what they do at the end, at the process, is one of the better models in the world, one of the best practices that we have seen. The last area has to do with, in terms of building the service value for a customer, is what is called relational nurture. There, the idea primarily is that I want to make this customer for life. It's called share of wallet, customer for life, and there are all kinds of metrics in marketing. My view here is I'm not interested in that one, as interested in saying if we do this relational approach to customer, how customer benefits. What is in it for the customer? What it says is that from a customer viewpoint, he says, I don't want to shop around. You are making my job easier because shopping around is expensive, it's transaction cost. In fact, there's a transaction cost theory created by Coase in economics. He got the Nobel Prize, theory of the firm, and Williamson actually wrote a great book in economics on transaction cost analysis. I find consumers are the best place to understand transaction cost analysis because they engage in so many transactions and the numbers for consumers are so large, they really are smarter than in a business-to-business market where transaction cost theory is used quite a lot. In other words, it is not worth the shopping effort, not worth searching for information. As I said, most consumers like to reduce choices. Now, I would like to reduce choice only if I know that you will be trustworthy. Only if I know that you as a supplier will have an integrity, so you will never violate my trust. So most relational nurture in a company is put together in terms of saying, how do we build trust as a process? How do we build integrity as a process? Because that is what the customer is looking for. That's what the benefit for the customer, right? So now there are 4 service value processes, 3 price value processes, 3 performance value processes, 10 processes, right? As I said earlier, no company does this everything right. So what I usually do is an audit in a company. Very simple. We go into the company just like any audit, anchor ourselves in the company, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it takes, go into all cross-functional. It's not just marketing people who create this value, please. Everybody creates this value. Different functions, different organizations are involved. So we go and do the audit, and then we do an assessment. Either we do assessment ourselves based upon some numerical processes, or we even ask the company people to make an assessment. Over 40 years of teaching now, I find fascinating And I'm beginning to believe that there's something called behavioral economics in some fashion, which is becoming an interesting. I was trained in psychology and statistics, so I like this trend. You know, economists always believes that unless you have hard numbers, everything is subjective. Till they found out that if you measure the GDP, which is hard number, through econometric forecasting techniques like time series, as opposed to if you ask 100 economists and say, what do you think is your estimate, subjective, as to what the GDP will be next quarter, 2 quarters, whatever it is, guess what? The assessment of 100 economists, just averaged alone, not even weighted, gives you a better forecast than time series data. Isn't that interesting? So I'm finding more and more that management somehow has integrated all the experiences to make a judgment. And the diversity of that judgment by management people is very important to understand. What is the different scores they give and why? Because often the problems are in companies that a given process is done by one department and the other department has a different image about the department. So perceptions are very important to capture actually. So we do it both ways. So you can get a rating done and you now aggregate all the scores. I can do more fancy statistical modeling if I wanted to and all the stuff, but just simple tool is very powerful as an audit. And guess what? Across several companies I have done this work, highest score any company ever has got is about 60 out of 100. 60. What does that tell me? Just like quality thinking as a philosophy, it's no longer a maximum standard like 6 sigma, it is continuous improvement. There is no end to improvement in creating value for customers. Which also makes sense because when you deliver a given value to the customer, guess what happens? Psychologically, behaviorally, customers want more, customers want different. You made yourself obsolete giving that value. The escalation of expectation arises. So the game says that you are constantly in a what's called the Kanban in Japanese language, continuous improvement process. So these 10 processes are a journey, not a destination. And what you want to do is that in some journeys, you are much farther ahead than other journeys for whatever reason, your historical background, competitive pressures, we don't care. But how can we make all of them go faster and faster on that journey is what we try to do. And if you look at it, the weakest point, surprisingly, in all of these areas turns out to be, when it comes to performance value, the biggest struggle and the lowest scores companies get is in innovation. In the price value, the lowest score and the biggest struggle is global sourcing. And in service value, the lowest scores they get, surprisingly, is universal access, which surprises me because it's so easy to do at the same time. So that's what you do, okay? This is my presentation. I will just conclude in a moment. We started by showing how customer-centric orientation is no longer a marketing phenomenon, but a corporate phenomenon. The CEOs are thinking from a customer viewpoint because we have an aging of the population. We have customer retention economics better than customer acquisition. We have this internet as an enabling tool that can make us more customer-centric. And we have this global competition. Then we looked at its strategic advantage, that if you break down your economics account by account, you see something below the surface that actually may be more insightful, like so much of business is anchored. As you grow your market share, you increase your cross subsidies by customers, by products, by SKUs, by geographies, however you do it, and that is your biggest weakness. I call it the curse of incumbency. Then we talked about, in fact, how the definition of a customer changes. A customer is really 3 customers. From a role definition viewpoint, a customer is a user, a payer, and a buyer. We talked about how there are 2 underlying dimensions, what you do and how you do. What you do has 2 components, product itself, service, as well as the price, value. How you do is the bedside manners, as we call it in healthcare. In professional services, we call it bedside manners, essentially, right? Then we talked about how these 3 different values are created by customers, the performance value, the price value, and the service value or personalization value by different processes. So here is my conclusion. Value creation, I have begun to believe, because I was trained in marketing, that value creation is through marketing programs like this flavor of the month sale or this flavor of the month clever advertising campaign. I believe there is a more sustainable long-term value creation by focusing on processes and not just on programs. In fact, if I have to make a choice, I would rather lean toward process more than the programs. And smarter companies have learned that processes are the best place to invest the capital, the management time and talent to create value for customers. Value creation is not just a process, but I call it a process obsession. And more recently, this became the transformation at General Electric. They became process obsessed, Six Sigma as a process, for example. And that's the fundamental shift in most of these companies, that once they buy a given process and they do all the economic research to say whether it's viable or not, because you have to invest time, money, sometimes capital dollars, they begin to get obsessed. It becomes a religion, orthodoxy sometimes, which I always worry. So yes, you need an obsession up to a point, but you also need a flexibility, because there's no one single process. It'll be multiple processes. And so far I have not figured out how to integrate those 10 processes. I'm learning myself, which is my next phase of research that I'm going to do in this area. Value creation is a continuous process. My earlier comment, there is no upper limit of value creation. There is no upper limit of this process. There's no optimal point. There's no asymptote upper limit, as we call it in statistics. It's a continuous process improvement. And just when we thought we were reaching a limit, there's a next plateau that comes about, right? So it's a Kanban, continuous process. And the last point is that value creation generally is delivered by a company, a value for the customers, if they do a cross-functional team. And Six Sigma people will tell you it does not work if you just do it within a given function. You have to have a cross-functional team working together. As it is true in target costing, as it is true in innovation, we are finding out more and more, as it is true in frontline information systems, all areas that we talked about. So I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. This is one of several I'm doing, as you know, and we are basically recording different learning experiences that I have done through academic research, through consulting, through advising governments and the companies, and putting it together into a framework. So this was a framework on how do we create value for our customers. Thank you very much.